I work on the 20th floor of a towering skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, the kind of place where people rush past each other with stiff smiles and hurried steps. The lobby smells faintly of cold marble and disappointment, while the upper floors reek of ambition in every corner. Glass walls surround us, as if to display the constant hustle to anyone who cares to peek inside from the adjacent buildings. The company is called Carter & Associates. It specializes in high-stakes corporate negotiations for clients whose net worth I can barely fathom. We handle everything from mergers to acquisitions to delicate real estate deals, but only for the ultra-wealthy. My name is Rachel Coleman, and for the past 2 years, I've been an executive assistant to the CEO of this empire, a woman named Lauren Carter. Lauren Carter is every rumor you've ever heard about powerful New York executives, and more. She's tall, with a posture so regal you'd think she was born in a palace. Her eyes are a piercing gray, like steel, sharp enough to slice through any half-baked excuse or bit of hesitation. Whenever she strides through the office, heads turn. Men in tailored suits, women in pencil skirts, interns clutching latte cups. Everyone looks up, stands straighter, tries just a bit harder in her presence. You can't help it. It's like a gravitational pull. In the 2 years I've worked for her, I've tried to decode her every move. She's meticulously efficient. She doles out tasks with quiet authority. She can pin you in place with a single glance if you make a mistake. But aside from that outward severity, she's more of an enigma than anything else, rarely showing personal warmth, rarely laughing, rarely allowing anyone to see deeper than her polished exterior. I used to believe she barely noticed me, that I was just one more name and face in her meticulously organized schedule. Perhaps an asset because I get things done on time, or because I never complain about working late. But I never imagined she'd think of me beyond that. One particular night, around 9 o'clock, all I wanted was to leave. I was exhausted from handling back-to-back phone conferences and preparing endless presentations. The building was almost deserted, with only a few lights glowing across the office floors. My feet ached in my heels. I longed for my tiny apartment in the East Village, where I could finally slip into sweatpants and watch some mindless TV. I stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the lobby, anticipating the mechanical hum that would take me down, away from the day's chaos. But just before the doors closed, someone else stepped in. I glanced up and realized it was Lauren Carter. I froze. Lauren was the last person I expected to see at that hour, though it wasn't unusual for her to stay late. She wore a sleek black blazer, matching trousers, and carried that faint aroma of expensive perfume, something subtly floral with a hint of musk. She inclined her head just a fraction in acknowledgement, but said nothing. The silence was thick, punctuated only by the gentle whir of the elevator mechanism. Each second felt like a minute. The walls seemed closer than usual, the lights harsher. My heart pounded in my chest, although I couldn't say why. It was just her presence, I suppose, the aura of command that always surrounded her. Then, without any warning, she turned sharply in my direction. My breath caught. She was so close I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the subtle glimmer of a delicate necklace beneath her collar. Her gaze slid over my face, and before I could register what was happening, she leaned in and pressed her lips against mine. My mind went completely blank. There was a rush of heat coursing through my body. Her perfume enveloped me, and the exquisite softness of her lips was like an electric jolt through my veins. It was a kiss that brooked no hesitation, firm, insistent, confident. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, it ended. She pulled back just as the elevator dinged on the ground floor. The door slid open with a hushed mechanical sound, and she stepped out. With her back turned to me, her voice cutting through the confusion, she simply said, "Have a good night, Rachel." Nothing more. She walked away. And I stood there, the elevator doors threatening to close again, on my stunned silence. It took the next occupant's pointed cough to snap me out of my reverie and hurry out of the metal box. I remember walking onto the sidewalk, the chill Manhattan air hitting my flushed cheeks, and thinking, what the hell just happened? The entire subway ride home was a blur. I kept replaying the moment. The way her hand, had it rested lightly on my arm, or was it on my waist? The truth was, my memory felt like an overexposed photograph, too bright and jumbled to parse clearly. But the overwhelming feeling was still there, a swirl of disbelief, shock, and deep down, a traitorous flutter of excitement. When I arrived at my apartment, everything felt surreal. I kicked off my heels, tossed my bag on the small kitchen table. My place wasn't large. It was cramped, the living area doubling as a bedroom if you unfolded the futon. Yet it was my sanctuary, a place of minimal possessions and maximum coziness. Under normal circumstances, I would have turned on some music, brewed a cup of chamomile, and scrolled through my phone until my eyes drooped. But that night, I couldn't do anything that resembled normal. My lips still felt warm, tingling, really, like an echo of Lauren's. My pulse fluttered in my throat whenever I let myself think about it. I changed into sweatpants and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I examined my slightly parted lips, half expecting to see some mark, some sign that I'd been pulled into an impossible moment. The question that tormented me was why? Why would she do that? Why me, of all people? Was this a game to her, a whim? Could it be that she was testing me in some twisted power play? I knew she was formidable in negotiations, but this was beyond any professional boundary. And if it was more than a test, what then? Sleep evaded me completely. I lay in bed, restless, imagining what might happen the next morning. Would she pretend it never happened? Would she call me into her office and demand an explanation? Or perhaps she'd simply regard me with that ever-cool gaze and wait to see what I would do. My mind spun scenarios until the first light of dawn, when I finally slipped into a fitful doze. The alarm went off far too soon. My eyes were gritty from lack of sleep, and my nerves felt frayed. I showered, dressed in my usual pencil skirt and blouse, and donned my stoic assistant mask, preparing for the hours ahead. The morning commute was miserable, with delayed trains and a crowd thicker than usual. By the time I arrived at the office, I was already behind schedule. I raced to my desk, dropped my purse into a drawer, and did my best to compose myself. I couldn't let my personal thoughts derail me from my responsibilities. Not when I worked for someone who demanded excellence at all times. Lauren's door was still closed when I arrived. That was normal. She often had early calls from international clients. I busied myself with emails, scheduling updates, and phone messages. Yet I kept glancing at the frosted glass of her office, waiting to see if her silhouette would appear, or if she'd summon me to go over the day's agenda. No call came. I started to breathe easier, lulled into a false sense of security, until she finally emerged around 11. She had a file in hand, her posture as flawless as ever. Her gaze swept the office, then landed on me. For a moment, I felt pinned in place. My pulse jackhammered, but her expression revealed nothing. It was the same composed, stern face I'd always known. "Rachel, please bring me the projections for next quarter," she said crisply. "And I'd like a coffee. Black." Her voice gave away no hint of what had transpired in the elevator. If anything, it was business as usual. My mind whirled. Was she really so calm? Did she expect me to mirror that calmness? My stomach twisted with confusion, but I managed a professional nod. "Yes, ma'am. Right away." Over the next couple of hours, I scarcely had a moment to think. I gathered the requested files, placed them neatly on her desk, and prepared her coffee. She continued on with her day, meeting with department heads, issuing directives, all without so much as a private word about our shared moment. My emotions warred between relief and frustration. Did she regret it? Was I reading too much into a single impulsive act? Around midday, we had a large departmental meeting. The CFO presented key statistics for an upcoming negotiation. I sat on the sidelines, taking notes, distributing handouts. Meanwhile, Lauren sat at the head of the table, fielding questions with precision. She was mesmerizing to watch in action, her gaze steady, her tone controlled and forceful. Yet I couldn't stop myself from noticing the subtle shape of her lips when she paused, or the memory of their pressure against mine. Halfway through the meeting, I realized I was staring directly at her mouth. Suddenly, her gaze flicked to mine. My cheeks flamed, and I dropped my eyes to my notepad, hoping no one else had caught me. But her expression remained inscrutable, and she proceeded as though nothing was amiss. At that point, I understood. If there was to be any acknowledgement, it would be on her terms alone. 2 days passed with agonizing slowness. Each morning, I half expected her to beckon me into her office and confront the situation. But it never happened. Instead, she simply kept to her normal routine of endless phone calls, quick lunches if she even ate, and high-powered negotiations. I found myself watching her from behind my desk, trying to see any sign that she remembered, that she cared. During those 2 days, however, small incidents began to pile up. Once, while I was in the copy room, I heard footsteps and turned to find her behind me. She didn't touch me, but there was a heavy tension in the air. Another time, our hands brushed as I handed her a folder. Such a small contact, but it sent sparks through my body. In both instances, she said nothing, only gave me that cool, assessing stare. On the third day, her assistant from the legal department approached my desk with a few documents. "Lauren wants these before she leaves," he said. Mind dropping them off. I nodded and took them, glancing at the clock. It was nearly 6, and the offices were emptying fast. I waited a few more minutes until the floor was nearly deserted, then made my way to her door, knocked softly, and entered when she called me in. The scene that greeted me was so quintessentially her. She was seated behind her massive glass desk, immaculate in her posture, with the city's skyline behind her through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She looked up from her computer, eyes flicking to the documents in my hand. "Thank you," she said, her tone polite but distant. "Just place them on my desk." I walked in, heart pounding, carefully placing the files in front of her. She glanced down, scanning the first page. Then her voice softened, just slightly. "Close the door, please." My stomach flipped. I shut the door, already bracing for what might come next. Was she going to talk about the elevator incident? Finally, Lauren leaned back, folding her arms. "About the other night," she began, as if she'd read my thoughts. She let the sentence dangle, forcing me to respond. My voice wavered. "Yes." She studied my face, unblinking. "It's obviously something we need to address." A swirl of adrenaline knotted my insides. Yes. Of course." There was a long pause, her gaze never leaving me. "Was it a mistake?" I whispered, my own voice sounding foreign to my ears. The question was loaded with desperation, even if I tried to keep it hidden. She tilted her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips, but it wasn't gentle. It was almost predatory. "Was it?" she echoed, as though the answer belonged to me as much as to her. My body felt hot under her scrutiny. Finally, she tapped the desk with a manicured fingertip. "I'm not in the habit of kissing my employees, Rachel." The way she said my name made my skin tingle. "But I won't apologize for what happened, either. Unless," she paused, searching my eyes. "You want me to?" Her words hung in the air. I swallowed. If I wanted her to say it was an error, to vow it would never happen again, was that truly what I wanted? My mind said it might be the safest path, but my heart pounded out a different answer. "I don't know," I said, voice trembling. I trailed off, unable to articulate the storm of emotions swirling within. The memory of that kiss was still too vivid, and my confusion warred with a deep yearning to feel it again. Lauren studied me for a moment longer. Then, giving me the barest nod, she murmured, "Understood. You can go." Disappointment crashed through me. Was that it? But she'd already turned back to her computer, posture rigid. The conversation was evidently over, on her terms. With legs that felt weak, I left her office and walked back to my desk, her words echoing in my mind. The weekend arrived without further confrontation, and I was grateful for the reprieve. Even so, Lauren loomed in my mind. I spent Saturday morning wandering through a local farmer's market, trying to enjoy the mild weather. I sampled fresh bread, admired bouquets of sunflowers, and inhaled the aroma of basil and ripe tomatoes. Yet part of me remained stuck in that pent-up tension of the previous days. Back home, I tried to binge a new TV series, but I couldn't concentrate. Every scene reminded me of her in some ridiculous way, a character's purposeful walk, a pair of sharp eyes. In frustration, I shut off the TV and tried to focus on mundane chores, laundry, cleaning, sorting through old mail. Nothing worked. Finally, I called my best friend, Jenna, who lived in Chicago. "Rachel, you sound stressed," Jenna said after 5 minutes of pleasantries. "What's going on?" I hovered near my kitchen counter, phone cradled against my ear. Normally, I told Jenna everything. But how could I tell her about this? That my boss, one of the city's most respected CEOs, had kissed me in an elevator and I couldn't stop thinking about it? Still, I needed an outlet, so I gave her a carefully edited version, that I had a new, complicated interest in someone at work. I described the tension, my confusion, the moral quandary. Jenna responded with alarm. "Rachel, you don't need that kind of drama in your life. Office romances are messy, especially if it's a boss." She was right, of course. It was unwise, potentially career-ruining. "I know," I said quietly, "but I can't help how I feel." "Then be careful," Jenna cautioned. "Sometimes it's best to leave certain doors closed." Her advice was sensible, and I tried to absorb it. But my heart felt heavy when we hung up. Over the next few hours, I replayed the conversation, telling myself that Jenna made excellent points. I was risking too much by letting this continue. Maybe on Monday, I'd keep everything strictly professional, as if that kiss had never happened. But on Sunday evening, something tore through my resolution. An email notification pinged on my phone. I opened it, expecting some generic work memo. Instead, it was from Lauren Carter. "We need to discuss the status of next week's negotiations. Meet me tomorrow at 8 p.m. for dinner at the Redwood on 47th Street. L. Carter." No question, no polite request. It was a command, stark and direct. My heart clutched in my chest. The Redwood was an upscale, low-lit restaurant known for its extensive wine list and refined atmosphere. Why there? Couldn't we have this discussion in the office? I stared at the email, my thumb hovering over the reply button. I could say no, I told myself. I could claim prior commitments. But something in me, that curious spark, refused to let me refuse. I typed a quick acknowledgement. "Understood. I'll be there. Rachel." My heart hammered after I hit send. Monday felt like 1,000 years away. I spent the entire workday Monday in a fog of anticipation. Lauren was tied up in meetings, and by the time 5 p.m. rolled around, she disappeared from the office without a word about our dinner. Maybe she'd changed her mind, I thought. But my phone remained silent, no cancellation email. When the clock neared 7:30, I hurried home just long enough to change into a simple black dress and modest heels. My nerves sizzled the entire cab ride to the Redwood, a sleek establishment with tinted windows and a discreet sign. The maitre d' greeted me politely, leading me toward a table in a dim corner. Lauren was already there, sipping a glass of red wine, the half-filled glass gleaming under the candlelight. She wore a charcoal gray blouse with a subtle sheen and tailored black trousers. Her hair was styled in a low chignon, highlighting her sharp cheekbones. There was a certain understated elegance about her, a quiet confidence that made me feel underdressed, no matter what I wore. She looked up as I approached, her expression composed. "Rachel," she said, rising slightly from her seat in a gesture of courtesy. "I'm glad you made it." My voice wavered. "Of course, Miss Carter. You wanted to discuss the negotiations?" A flicker of a smile crossed her lips, and she gestured for me to sit. Among other things, the atmosphere was intimate, the lighting low, and the sound of hushed conversation floated from other tables. My pulse thudded as I took my seat. A waitress appeared to offer menus and ask if I'd like a drink. Lauren didn't wait for my response. She smoothly ordered a bottle of Cabernet for the table. With the waitress gone, Lauren leaned forward. "How was your day?" That threw me off. The question was so normal. "Busy," I managed. "Yours?" She waved a hand in a dismissive gesture. "Meetings mostly. But let's not talk about that right now. She paused, studying me. You look lovely. Heat blossomed in my cheeks. Thank you, I whispered. We made small talk for a few minutes, small talk that felt excruciatingly charged. Every word between us was loaded with the unspoken. Finally, the waitress returned to pour our wine, and Lauren lifted her glass. To new beginnings, she said cryptically. I clinked my glass against hers, heart pounding. New beginnings, I echoed, unsure what exactly we were toasting. A few sips in, Lauren set her glass down. Rachel, she said softly, I want to be clear. This is not a typical business meeting. If you're uncomfortable, you can leave at any time. My grip tightened on the stem of my wine glass. She was giving me an out, yet she knew as well as I did that I wouldn't take it. I'm here, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. I want to see where this goes. At that, her lips curved in a small, genuine smile. Perhaps the first time I'd seen such an unguarded expression from her. I appreciate your honesty. Dinner arrived, delicate plates of seared salmon and roasted vegetables for me, while Lauren had some elaborate dish involving braised short ribs. We talked about the upcoming negotiations for a major real estate deal, about market forecasts and client expectations. It was all part of the day job, but it felt oddly intimate to discuss it in this warm, dim-lit bubble. Yet I knew there was more behind her invitation. And indeed, after we finished the main course, she set down her fork and studied me carefully. There's a line we're crossing here, she said. I need to know if you're prepared for that. My hands trembled slightly in my lap. I don't know, I admitted. I've never been in this situation before. You're my boss, and this is... My voice trailed off. She nodded. I understand. But some lines, once crossed, can't be undone. I swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing on me. We stared at each other for a moment, the bustling restaurant around us fading into the background. There was a hush, a tension that felt almost tangible. Finally, she reached across the table, letting her fingers gently brush the back of my hand. That simple contact was enough to unravel my fragile composure. Heat raced on my arm and spread throughout my body. Without thinking, I turned my hand over so that our palms touched. Her skin was warm, her grip assured but not aggressive. We left the restaurant not long after, neither of us finishing dessert. Outside, a cool breeze tugged at my hair. Lauren offered to walk me to a cab. Once we were away from the glow of the streetlights, she paused and turned to face me. Rachel, she said, voice hushed. May I? I realized she was asking permission to kiss me. Despite the swirl of conflicting thoughts in my mind, I found myself nodding. She leaned in, pressing her lips to mine softly, a stark contrast to the urgent kiss in the elevator. This time, there was patience, a slow savoring. I let my eyes close, melting into that moment. Her hand slid around my waist, drawing me closer. Time felt suspended, the night air cool against my cheeks while her warmth surrounded me. Finally, she pulled back, her breath a soft caress against my skin. Good night, she whispered. Trembling, I managed to hail a cab. The ride home was a haze of emotions, hope, fear, desire. Yet at the forefront was an undeniable truth. There was no going back to how things had been. We were on the verge of something that could change both our lives forever. The following week was, in a word, surreal. By day, Lauren and I maintained a strictly professional demeanor at the office. She continued to be her usual commanding self, giving orders, setting schedules, leading the company with her trademark poise. I, for my part, kept everything running smoothly, managing her calendar, coordinating with department heads, fielding calls from high-profile clients. But there were small moments. The way she lingered just a fraction longer when handing me a file. The flicker of a smile shared between us in the hallway when no one else was looking. A quick, covert brush of fingertips if we were close enough to risk it. These stolen instances felt like private little secrets in a building full of corporate hustle and scrutiny. Outside of work, our interactions intensified. Sometimes, she'd text me late in the evening, a simple thinking of you that would make my heart leap. Other nights, She'd invite me to her penthouse on the Upper East Side, and I'd enter a world of minimalist luxury. White furniture, abstract art, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering city below. She'd offer me a glass of wine, and we'd sit on her plush sofa talking about everything and nothing. Her travels to London and Tokyo for business, my small-town upbringing in Ohio, our shared love of classical piano. Her father once played, apparently. Yet even in these more personal conversations, Lauren was guarded. She revealed bits of her past, but always carefully, as though certain doors were locked behind thick walls. Every now and then, I sensed a deep sadness beneath her polished exterior, a vulnerability she fought to keep hidden. It made me want to reach out, to peel back her armor and see the woman underneath. One Saturday, we found ourselves having a lazy morning at her penthouse. She'd ordered pastries from a nearby cafe, and we were curled up on the couch, sipping coffee and reading the paper. At one point, I casually asked about her family. Did she have any siblings? She tensed, setting her cup down. I'm an only child. I pressed gently. What about your parents? Are they nearby? Her expression went shuttered. My parents are away, she said, in a tone that warned me not to probe further. An awkward silence settled. Then she changed the subject, something about a new client meeting. I got the message. That particular topic was off limits. Still, a seed of curiosity had been planted, and I wondered what lay behind her reluctance to talk about them. Soon, the tension between our professional roles and personal connection grew thicker. The office was abuzz with speculation. People noticed that I seemed more stressed, yet oddly glowy, and that Lauren occasionally seemed preoccupied. A few times, I caught colleagues glancing at us with thinly veiled curiosity. Were we being too obvious? The risk weighed heavily on me. If someone filed a complaint or the board found out, it could be disastrous for both of us. One afternoon, as I was typing up a report, the internal phone line lit up. Lauren's voice came through. Rachel, I need you in my office. My pulse quickened. Yes, Miss Carter, I replied, trying to maintain a neutral tone. Inside her office, she motioned for me to close the door. She looked agitated, a slight frown creasing her brow. We have a problem, she said without preamble, holding up a tablet that displayed an article on some gossip blog. The headline read, Executive Affairs? Carter and Associates CEO spotted with mystery companion. My stomach dropped. How did they? Lauren exhaled. Someone must have seen us. Could be anyone, a paparazzo, a bored bystander with a phone camera. The article is mostly speculation, but it's enough to raise eyebrows. Panic squeezed my chest. What do we do? She pressed her lips together. I'll handle the PR side, but we need to be more discreet. Her eyes flicked to mine, revealing a flicker of regret, and something else. I'm sorry you got dragged into this. I swallowed, trying to quell the rising tide of dread. It's not your fault, I said softly. We were both there. She gave me a long look, then nodded. Let's get through these negotiations first. After that, we'll figure out our next steps. For the next few days, we worked tirelessly on the real estate deal. Meetings bled into the early evenings, phone calls with overseas clients stretched into the night. At times, I forgot about the rumor mill entirely, swept up in the intensity of the high-stakes negotiations. Lauren was in her element, confident, strategic, occasionally ruthless. Watching her command a room filled me with awe and a strange pride, as though her success was somehow ours to share. One night, though, after everyone had left, she called me into her office again. This time, her face was drawn, exhaustion evident. How are you holding up? She asked quietly. Tired, I admitted. But fine. She hesitated. Rachel, this situation is complicated enough without adding outside scrutiny. Perhaps we should step back, at least until the negotiations are finalized. My heart lurched. Are you saying you want to end this? My voice sounded shakier than I intended. She looked torn. I don't know. I just don't want you to be hurt because of me. Hurt. The idea that she was more concerned about my well-being than her own was both touching and terrifying. I weighed my response, all my emotions roiling. Finally, I moved closer, placing a trembling hand on her cheek. "Lauren," I said, voice unsteady. "I'm an adult. I know what I'm risking. But I'm choosing this." She sighed, leaning into my touch. "I wish it were simpler." In that tender moment, I realized how much she struggled with vulnerability. She was used to being in total control of her company, her schedule, her life. Allowing someone close meant accepting unpredictability. And unpredictability, for someone like Lauren Carter, was terrifying. The real estate negotiations were a triumph. Carter and Associates sealed the deal on a massive development project that would generate millions for their client. The office erupted in subdued celebration, champagne toasts and glass flutes, polite congratulations all around. But as the euphoria of victory subsided, Lauren seemed increasingly distant. She'd make excuses to stay late in her office, leave abruptly for private matters, and her texts to me became less frequent. I worried I'd done something wrong, or that the weight of the rumors had finally taken its toll. A week later, on a rainy evening, she sent me a one-line email, "Come to my penthouse tonight, 9 p.m. My stomach nodded. This felt different, more urgent. I arrived at her building, shaking off my umbrella in the lobby, and took the elevator up to her floor. She opened the door before I could knock. Her expression was tense, her eyes rimmed with fatigue. "Rachel," she said, ushering me in. I stepped inside, dripping coat in hand. "Lauren, what's going on?" She walked into the living room, where the city lights glimmered outside the windows, distorted by the sheets of rain. Her arms were crossed, like a shield. "There's something I have to tell you," she began, voice hushed. My heart pounded. Was she firing me? Ending things? My mind spun with possibilities. But then she turned to me, eyes shimmering with an emotion I couldn't place. "Fear? I'm not who you think I am," she said. "I mean, yes, I'm CEO of Carter and Associates, and I live this life of success in Manhattan. But there are things I've hidden. Things about my past." Silence fell. The faint hum of the city traffic below was the only sound. I moved closer, tentatively reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. "I don't expect you to forgive me, or even understand," she said, voice cracking. "I just need you to know." She took a shaky breath and began to speak, words tumbling out in a halting confession. She told me about her childhood in rural Vermont, a family farm that fell into debt, and how her father had turned to questionable associates to bail them out. She told me about the loss of that farm, about the stifling shame she carried when she realized her father's so-called investors were linked to criminal activities. She'd left Vermont as soon as she turned 18, vowing never to look back. "I built everything from scratch," she said, anger and pain warring in her tone. "I changed my name from Lauren Miller to Lauren Carter. I wanted to sever any ties to my past, to start fresh. But the guilt, it's always been there." She finally turned to me, eyes searching my face for judgment. "That's why I'm so guarded," she whispered. "I built this empire to prove that I'm not like them. But deep down, I keep wondering if everything I've created could come crashing down the moment someone uncovers my roots." A wave of empathy and sadness washed over me. This was the secret she'd been carrying, the fear of her carefully crafted identity unraveling. My heart ached for the lonely teenager she must have been, the pain of losing her home, of burying her past under a polished new persona. I stepped forward, ignoring her resistance, and wrapped my arms around her. For a moment, she stiffened. Then, she let out a shaky breath and sank into the embrace. I felt her trembling against me. "It's okay," I whispered, stroking her back. "We all have pasts we want to escape." She pulled back slightly, looking at me with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Rachel, you don't know how many nights I've lain awake, terrified you'd find out and see me differently." Emotions clogged my throat. "I see you," I managed. "And I'm still here." After her confession, Lauren seemed more open, more real. It was like a doorway had finally been unlocked. We spent that night talking in hushed voices, curled up on her sofa as the rain beat against the windows. She told me about her father's final days, how guilt had consumed him before he passed, and how she'd vowed to never repeat his mistakes. Her drive for success, her need for absolute control in every aspect of life. It all made sense now. In turn, I shared pieces of my own history that I rarely spoke of. Growing up with an overprotective single mother in Ohio, where the highlight of the year was the county fair. My longing for something bigger, which drove me to New York after college. My romantic failures, each one leaving me a bit more cautious. It was dawn by the time we realized we'd talked the entire night. The rain had stopped, replaced by a hazy sunrise peeking between skyscrapers. Our eyes were heavy, our voices raw. But the emotional closeness we felt was unlike anything before. For the first time, I saw Lauren Carter, the woman, not just the CEO. And I suspected she, too, finally glimpsed me as more than an efficient assistant or a forbidden flirtation. In the weeks that followed, our relationship evolved. We found moments of genuine tenderness, like cooking together in her penthouse's sleek kitchen or taking Sunday morning walks through Central Park, wearing casual clothes and baseball caps to avoid recognition. We'd hold hands discreetly, a small, rebellious act against the city's watchful gaze. However, the lingering threat of publicity remained. That gossip article had been just a spark. A bigger blaze could follow if we weren't careful. The board of Carter and Associates was notoriously conservative, and any scandal could jeopardize Lauren's position. We both knew the risks. We tried to be cautious, but desire and closeness often overshadowed our caution. One afternoon, an envelope appeared on my desk with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a crude message: "Keep your secrets or everyone will know." My hand shook as I stared at it, uncertain if it was meant for me or for Lauren, or if it was even real blackmail or just a prank. But fear coiled inside me. I showed it to Lauren immediately, who reacted with a steely fury. "I'll handle this," she said, eyes narrowed. Over the next few days, she consulted with her legal team, her personal security experts, and even a private investigator. Tension thrummed through the entire office, even though no one quite knew why the CEO was on edge. During this time, Lauren and I hardly spoke outside of pressing business matters. She was locked in near-constant meetings with attorneys and PR advisors, leaving me in a swirl of worry. When we did see each other, her face was drawn, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. I suspected memories of her past were swirling like ghosts, fueling her anxiety that it could all be exposed. Then came the final blow. One evening, as I was tidying up my desk, Lawrence had a security approach me with a grim expression. "Miss Carter wants you to go home and pack an overnight bag. She'll have a car pick you up in 2 hours." No details given, but it sounded urgent. Heart pounding, I rushed home, stuffed clothes into a duffel, and waited. Sure enough, a black sedan arrived. The driver silently took me to an address in Westchester County, a sprawling estate hidden behind tall hedges. I stepped out into the crisp evening air, bag slung over my shoulder, and found Lauren waiting by the door. "I'm sorry for dragging you here," she said softly, guiding me inside. "But until we figure out who's threatening us and why, I want you safe." The estate belonged to a friend of hers, someone out of town who'd allowed Lauren the use of the property. The mansion was dimly lit, a caretaker having prepared only a few rooms. Lauren led me to a cozy study where a small fire crackled in the fireplace. It felt surreal, like stepping into a Gothic novel. We settled on a leather couch, the firelight dancing across her features. She finally told me the truth. The private investigator had traced the threatening note to an old associate of her father's, a man who blamed Lauren's father for landing him in prison years ago. He'd pieced together Lauren's real identity and was seeking revenge, threatening to expose her past and possibly smear her company if she didn't pay him off. Anger and protectiveness flared in me. "We can't let him get away with this," I said. "Can't we go to the police?" Lauren sighed. "We could, but there's no solid proof tying him to the threat. It's all insinuation. If he goes public with my past, it's not a crime. And if I try to silence him, it'll look even worse." A tear slid down her cheek, quickly brushed away. "I can't lose everything I've built," she whispered. Wrapping my arms around her, I murmured, "We'll figure it out." We spent 3 tense days at the Westchester estate, rarely venturing outside. Lauren's legal team scrambled to gather evidence to discredit the blackmailer. The caretaker brought us groceries, and we lived in a strange limbo, part romantic getaway, part prison. Despite the fear, or maybe because of it, the bond between us grew stronger. We clung to each other in the quiet hours, finding solace in gentle touches and whispered reassurances. On the 4th day, her attorney arrived with critical news. They discovered that the blackmailer's finances were in shambles, and he had outstanding warrants for unrelated crimes. Armed with that knowledge, they orchestrated a careful plan. They tipped off the authorities anonymously, who then picked him up on the outstanding warrants. With him in custody, his capacity to threaten Lauren diminished drastically. When the call came confirming his arrest, Lauren collapsed against me in a wave of relief. For a long moment, we just held each other. The crisis had passed, or at least eased. That evening, we returned to the city. In her penthouse, as the skyline twinkled, we found ourselves standing by the windows, gazing out. She turned to me, eyes full of exhaustion, gratitude, and something deeper, love. "Rachel," she began, voice trembling slightly. "I'm not good at this, but thank you for staying when things got complicated. For standing by me." I pressed my forehead to hers. "I wouldn't be anywhere else." We kissed, a slow, tender exchange that felt like a promise. Every brush of our lips, every gentle touch, spoke of a future we might finally believe in. As life settled back into a rhythm, Lauren and I worked out a plan. She confided in the board about the blackmail situation, on her terms, and emphasized that the threat had been neutralized. Some board members grumbled about conduct and reputation, but Lauren handled them with her trademark finesse. Meanwhile, I decided it was time for a new challenge. While I loved working with Lauren, I recognized that continuing as her direct employee would always complicate our personal relationship. After many late-night discussions, we reached a solution. I'd move to a different role in the company, something that offered growth and didn't require daily contact with her. That way, we could maintain a personal relationship without overshadowing my professional prospects or causing endless speculation among employees. My new position involved project coordination in an international expansion team, a big step up in responsibility and prestige. It meant occasional travel, more autonomy, and best of all, a separation from the constant overshadow of CEO-assistant dynamics. On my last day as her executive assistant, I packed at my desk, feeling a wave of nostalgia. So many memories had been made at that desk: stressful deadlines, frantic scheduling, stolen glances, whispered confessions. Lauren emerged from her office, a subtle sadness in her eyes. "You'll do great," she said quietly. I smiled. "Thank you for everything." We couldn't exactly kiss or celebrate openly, not in the middle of the office, but the depth of feeling was there. We both felt it. 6 months later, I found myself in London on a business trip, overseeing the opening of a new Carter and Associates branch. I was busy, fulfilled, and excited about the future. And every evening, a video call with Lauren anchored me. We still faced challenges, time zone differences, the delicate balancing act of public perception, but we navigated them together. One crisp autumn day, as the leaves turned golden in Central Park, I flew back to New York. Lauren met me at the airport. She embraced me in the arrivals hall with a warm hug that felt like coming home. We walked out hand in hand, ignoring the curious glances. In the car ride back to the city, she rested her head on my shoulder, her eyes drifting shut. "I've missed you," she said softly. I pressed a kiss to her hair. "I've missed you, too." We didn't have all the answers, and life would continue to test us. But in that moment, I felt a sense of rightness, of choosing a path that made sense for both of us. Our relationship had begun with a single impulsive kiss in an elevator, a kiss that shattered the barriers of routine and convention. It led us through secrecy, fear, and revelations of her hidden past. Now, it was something deeper, something real. In the rush of Manhattan traffic, with honking cabs and towering buildings, we found our own quiet space, together. Whatever came next, we were ready. We had made our choice, knowing it would transform our lives. And in the grand tapestry of risk and reward that is New York City, that choice felt like the most important negotiation of all.